Welcome back to Elite Literary Book Group. I'm Rachel Beck. And so now we're on chapter 25. And this chapter begins with Scout playing with the roly-poly, and she wants to squash it, and Jim says, leave it alone. Just let it be. And she just can't figure out what has been going on with her brother. And I think he's just becoming more sensitive. And I think with his age being a little bit older, probably 14 or so, this is actually more of the coming of age would be 14. I think when she begins this, she's 9. So things are hitting him more keenly, especially the injustice of the world. And it's almost got him to the point where it's like, I don't even want to see a bug killed. And she says, reckon you're at the stage now where you don't kill flies and mosquitoes. Let me know when you change your mind. Tell you one thing though, I ain't gonna sit around and not scratch a red bug. I'll dry up, he answered drowsily. Jim was the one who was getting to be more like a girl every day, not I. So she leans back and she thinks about some time has passed, and she thinks about Dill and the last conversation they had when Atticus was going to go tell Helen about Tom. He runs into the boys. They ask for a ride. Ask, can we go with you? And so Dill's relating the story. Scout said, Dill, she just fell down in the dirt. Just fell down in the dirt like a giant with a big foot just came over along and stepped on her. Just Dill's fat foot hit the ground like you would step on an ant. So I think there's a little, connection there in the beginning of just being mindless of, this insect, and the comparison is just basically how inhumane it was, all of this for Tom's family. And back at the party when all of this is happening, she says that in that world, the only domestic disturbance was the absence of Calpurnia. But in Tom's world, Helen is about to be told that her husband is dead, and now their children are fatherless. And there's the juxtaposition of what's going on in this world and what's going on in that world. And then she makes a comment about the aftermath, and this kind of follows along what I said about the false narrative. They're not blaming themselves. They're not saying, he shouldn't have been convicted. They're going along with the story and then blaming him for trying to escape his circumstances. So she said, Macon was interested by the news of Tom's death for perhaps 2 days. 2 days was enough for the information to spread through the county. Did you hear about? No. Well, they said he was running fit to beat lightning. To Macon, Tom's death was typical. Typical of a nigger to cut and run. Typical of a nigger's mentality. To have no plan, no thought for the future. Just run blind first chance he saw. Funny thing, Atticus Finch might have got him off scot-free, but wait, hell no. You know how they are, easy come, easy go. Just shows you that Robinson boy was legally married. They said he kept himself clean, went to church and all that. But when it comes down to the line of Vinner's mighty thin, nigger always comes out of them. So blaming also just the victim. And I think that Tom's death is like a martyr, in a way. And I think that's very similar to a lot of the senseless killings that happen, because unfortunately it almost takes death to happen before people start to wake up a little bit. And it's a very slow moving process, but something interesting also happens, and that is Mr. Underwood writes an editorial. And, you see in the beginning that, he's not seen as someone who isn't racist. But he was there the whole time Atticus was at the court, protecting Tom. He had a gun with him. And you can see this, there's something shifting in him. She says that he is the most bitter, and he couldn't have cared less who canceled their advertising. He was going to say what he wanted to say. If he wanted, in the people's mind, she says, if he wanted to make a fool of himself with the paper, that was his business. Mr. Underwood didn't talk about miscarriages of justice. He was writing so children could understand. Mr. Underwood simply figured it was a sin to kill cripples, be they standing, sitting, or escaping. He likened Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children. And Macham thought he was trying to write an editorial poetical enough to be reprinted in the Montgomery Advertiser. How could this be, I wondered, as I read Mr. Underwood's editorial? Senseless killing. Tom had been given due process of law to the day of his death. He had been tried openly and convicted by 12 good men at the time, my father, who fought for him all the way. Then Mr. Underwood's meaning became clear. Atticus had used every tool available to free men to save Tom Robinson, but in the secret courts of men's hearts, Atticus had no case. Tom was a dead man the minute May Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. And so you see a couple of things here when you go back to the title, To Kill a Mockingbird. And it's a sin to kill a mockingbird because mockingbirds don't do anything but make music and are joyful and so forth. I hate to see anybody kill any bird, but I have a couple of mockingbirds in my backyard, and they are very pleasant creatures. They just, they seem to always fly in pairs, and it's neat to watch them. And so I think a main point here is, okay, this is being said by a writer. Harper Lee is a writer. Social change usually gets momentum by writers, by somebody willing to speak out. And he's not trying to change their mind about being racist because he knows he can't. But he's also pointing out that, Tom was also crippled. He wouldn't have probably gotten very far. They shot him 17 times. There was a recent case of that too, where, you had someone getting shot just so many times, and a police officer's like on the car, and the people were just defenseless. There was no reason to behave that way. So it kind of also implies almost another mob mentality that happened to shoot the man 17 times. How people behave when they get around each other, and it can be like a mob mentality, just can be overly violent. But I like to bring this up because I think it's an important reminder And when people want to censor books, and I understand that there's a lot of sensitive material, I have to deal with that as a teacher and try to be very respectful of it. But at the same time, it's the reason why I do what I do is because authors are the social critics of the world. And it's, unless we want to end up like Russia, we need to have people questioning what we're doing. And it's like, even with this book, there's of course inappropriate language, and there's some parts that are hard to read, but you have to look at it as a way of, this was making people more empathetic. It was changing them. This book made them see something that they couldn't see before. And that's the power of a story. It doesn't necessarily happen in a rant or anything like that. But if you can tell people a story that people relate, and you show their humanity, just as Mark Twain does with Jim, and Huck slowly realizes that this is a person. He has children. He's really no different from me, and in the way that he feels and what he longs for in his dreams. It humanizes, people, rather than dehumanize people. And that's what you want people to see, and to have some understanding and some empathy. That's what literature does for people. Okay, so chapter 26 is another short chapter, so I'll just talk about it briefly. And then I think probably one more video will finish up the book. But she goes back to the Radley place, and she passes the Radley place, but we haven't heard about the Radley place for some time now. And I think she purposely does this because his story is going to be important at the end. And so it's kind of coming full circle, but it also shows a little bit of maturity. This isn't just this person and this situation isn't just a game as it was in the beginning. So I'll just read this part. The Radley place had ceased to terrify me, but it was no less gloomy, no less chilly under the great oaks, and no less uninviting. Mr. Nathan Radley could still be seen on a clear day, walking to and from town. We knew Boo was there for the same old reason. Nobody had seen him carried out yet. I sometimes felt a twinge of remorse when passing by the old place at ever having taken part in what must have been sheer torment on Arthur Radley. What reasonable recluse wants children peeping through his shutters, delivering greetings on the end of a fishing pole, wandering in the collards at night? And yet I remember 2 Indian head pennies, chewing gum, soap dolls, a rusty medal, a broken watch chain. Jim must have put them away somewhere. So this is reminding us that, he was trying to reach out to the kids, not in a creepy way, but in a way that people, they do need each other. Communities, people aren't meant to be isolated. And so I think she's just reminding us that the story's still there. It kind of gets lost in all the other stuff that happens, but he's going to come back at the end. And then this chapter goes back to also school and reminds us of, let's remember the education here. and she uses current events as an example. Even so, many of the children, even so, not many of the children knew what a current event was. Little Chuck Little, 100 years old in his knowledge of cows and their habits, was halfway through Uncle Natshell's story when Miss Gates stopped him. "Charles, that's not a current event. That's an advertisement." So, if people don't even really understand what a current event is, trying to get them to make sense of something like history repeating itself is kind of going to be a difficult thing to do. And Cecil Jacobs, he was the one that used to make fun of Scout, especially for the fact that her dad was defending Tom Robinson. He knew what a current event was. When his turn came, he got in front of the room and began, "Old Hitler, Adolf Hitler, Cecil," said Miss Gates. "Never begin with old anybody." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Old Adolf Hitler has been persecuting Cecil." "No, Miss Gates, it says here." "Well, anyway, old Adolf Hitler has been after the Jews and has been putting them in prisons, and he's taking them away from their property and won't let any of them out of the country." And so the news that they're getting right now is the very beginning of the Holocaust. And I was just watching Ken Burns' documentary about America and the Holocaust, which doesn't put America in the best light as far as our response. Now, one way to contextualize that is that Americans were very afraid of immigration, mainly because they were in a depression. And you had all these people without jobs and waiting in lines. But here's another thing. For a long time, they didn't believe the news. They didn't believe when, 1,000,000 Jews were killed. So it can't be 1,000,000. They're making this up. And there was a lot of rhetoric that you hear that is kind of similar to what we might hear today. Like, for instance, America First came out of this era. And I think one of the most disturbing things that he points out in the documentary is that Hitler looked at the West as, and their treatment of blacks in the country and their lack of rights, and he admired this sort of thing. So I think what this really shows us is how dangerous it is to have racism and people believing that they are superior. Some people might not think that's that big of a deal, but look at what it could lead to. As far as, I don't know the exact number, but at least 6 million people died in the Holocaust. And it's very hard to watch this documentary, but it's important for us to watch. It's important, and again, it's not about trying to make us look bad or feel guilty or anything like that. It's to help us see what this kind of rhetoric leads to, so that we become more mindful about what politicians are saying. It's our job to discern and to not be sheep, but to really listen and pay attention and see patterns that we don't want repeated, to take them seriously. To protect ourselves too, to protect our own country. That's important. So anyway, something about this doesn't quite sit well with Scout, as she tells Jim, well, our teacher really hates Hitler. Oh, and the teacher was talking about a democracy, how we're a democracy. And that's happening to them because they're not a democracy. Well, being a democracy means that you have equal rights. So this is kind of going, a scout. If that's true, then shouldn't we all have equal rights? And I'll let her say it. Let's see. She's telling Jim, well, coming out of the courthouse, Miss Gates, well, she was going down the steps, with Miss Stephanie, and this is the teacher who hates Hitler, and I heard her say, it's time somebody taught them a lesson. They were getting way above themselves. And the next thing they think they can do is marry us. So they're getting above themselves. They're getting empowered in a way, or something that she finds dangerous. That's not really any different than the Germans feeling threatened by the Jews, right? We can't let them get too far ahead, too successful, or anything like that. So, but this only infuriates Jim because he's sick of it. He's sick of hearing about this. And so he just says, I don't want to hear about that courthouse again. Okay, I don't want to hear anything else about what happened. And of course, this just makes her upset. And she goes to Atticus. And of course, it seems like she's always being told, just let Jim work out his feelings. Okay? He's going through a rough time. But that's the case. And it is a lot to sort out for a young person. So, at any rate, I'll leave you with that. And then there's 27, 28, maybe one or two videos left. But, all right. Thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate it. Okay.